Good morning, everyone. Just setting up the settings. Tappity tap, tap, tap. Click, 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 click. Hope everyone is doing well today. On this, what is it, Friday? It is Friday. And I can go back over there. Okie dokie. Awesome. Coffee for the win. Let's move this a bit closer. And we got a full body grumble. Coffee. Coffee, coffee. But maybe a bit further away. Alrighty, the combined chat seems to be working, which is always good. Hello, YouTube land. Hello, Twitch land. Hope everyone is doing well. Or as well as can be. That's all one could really ever expect. Just decluttering my desk a little. Not that I have a particularly cluttered desk. Oh. Isn't it Easter weekend this weekend? When is Easter weekend? First of March. I know. So, still 20 days away. Good to know, just because of holidays and stuff. Public holidays. Oh, pencil over there. All the other pencils. Random screw. Apparently, I do have a screw loose. I'm not sure why I have a screw loose, other than the normal reasons. But there you go. Oh, excuse me. Oh. Yawning at 9 o'clock in the morning, you know it's going to be a rough day. Weenie fair. Now we should be doing something like that today. 4 videos at 15,000 words. It's a decent chunk of work. Let me advertise this in places. Roger Wilco. Stop calling me Roger. Good morning, Monty. I hope you're doing well today. staring directly between the two cross beams of mine. Pretty weird. Right. All right. Okay. Self-promotion done. I can close all of those. Well, I'm glad that you're at least doing as well as can be. Monty, very, very glad. Yeah. Oh, coffee. A bit more. So I need to fiddle with buttons to get the camera working, and every morning I knock it off of center. Or I sit in a slightly different place. Both options are equally likely. Oh yeah, caffeine don't fail us, never fails us. If it is failing you, you are drinking it in insufficient quantity. There is a cat that just wandered in. Thankfully, it is my cat. Well, our cat. As much as any cat is any person's cat. What's funny is if I whistle, the cat comes running, but the dog ignores me. If I go, psst, 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 the cat ignores me and the dog comes running. Need to start calling the cat Fido or something. Fair enough. Fair enough. But yes. He's, what, 7, 8 years old now? 9, maybe? Long enough that I don't specifically remember how old he is. You're gonna be a pain. Of course you're gonna be a pain. Why wouldn't you? You're a cat. Good morning, Paladin Storm. I hope you're having a fantastic day, night, or whatever it mayhaps be for you. The narration hasn't started for the day, but it shall shortly. Alliteration, gotta love it. All alliteration is absolutely astounding. All right. I think we've postponed hydration. Coffee, unfortunately. Doesn't really constitute hydration. And the funny thing is, technically this doesn't either. Takes 2 hours for this to make its way through the system. All right, on to the first story. First chapter. We're going to do the last 2 chapters of The Human and the Dungeon, or The Human from a Dungeon. Then the next 2 chapters are Because Someone Had to. Methinks. That puts us at... Well, excuse me, yes. So the next 2 chapters of Someone Had to is quite long, or are quite long. But thankfully it's not a permanent thing. We should be able to squeak through. And then tomorrow we can do some one-shots. And then more one-shots. That is the plan. Hopefully we will achieve it today. Oh, the human. Oh, faithful. Oh, excuse me. Very, very rude of me. Okay, are we all ready? Steady. Steady. And away we go. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series, The Human from a Dungeon. If you are new from the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 24. High Chief Ulamark, Adventurer Level NA, Orc Kokenian. Ulamark, you old fecker. I feel like it's been years. How have you been? A dwarf dressed head to toe in the finest fashions and walking with an exaggerated swagger that he knew annoyed those around him, strolled into my office. If I hadn't known who it was by his voice, I'd have known who it was by his ability to slip past Ryzen. I'd have known who it was by his ability to slip past Ryzen. Lath Hull, a mer of business and a self-proclaimed double agent. Good morning, Brian. I hope you're doing well today. A real double agent would never admit to being one, even under hours of torture. The reason for that is pretty simple. Admitting to being a spy is a surefire way to make certain that you die painfully, and that your family no longer has a place to live. In some nations, your family will actually face the same punishment that you do. Thankfully for Lyath, he's not actually a spy, simply an information broker and a secret messenger between the High Chiefdom of Kokena and the Empire of Kalkuti. On occasion, he'll stumble upon a juicy bit of information while on his drunken benders and pass the word along. But he doesn't seem to favor one nation over the other. Yep, doing as well as can be. Putting one foot in front of the other. Keeping it vertical, all that stuff. He takes some getting used to, but once you do, he's a good friend to have. Able to switch gears from serious to silly in mere moments. Great to unwind with, and despite his annoying demeanor, he's somewhat pleasant to be around. An enigma, to be sure. It's only been months, Lyath, but I have been in good health. How about yourself? I replied with a grin. Ah, I've seen you be. Ha! I see you've been counting the days then. I couldn't be better, he said, grabbing a seat. Met myself a sexy little elfie who's been keeping me entertained the last few days. About fucking time, too. I'd been on a desert-level dry spell. How's business? I interrupted, not wanting to hear about his debauchery. Ah, straight to it then, he said with a measure of disappointment. Well, business has been right fecking dark as of late. Good, but dark. The Drow are definitely planning an attack, and there is something crappy about it. Crappy? I asked. Yes, absolutely crappy. Stinks to high heavens, it does. The last few times they've attacked, it's been unorganized and just generally amateurish. Their entire fucking strategy was to give a bunch of bastards sharpened sticks and shove them at the enemy. Yes, I recall, I said. The ill-conceived strategies of the inbred Bastard King. What's different this time? They've got goddamn formations. I narrowed my eyes at the dwarf. Has something happened to the inbred bastard? The death of Ymlofen would be a disastrous for... The death of Ymlofen would be disastrous for everyone neighbouring the Drow. His incompetence and habitual political executions had kept the bloodthirsty culture of the Night Kingdom in check for half a century. The only things he's really good at is staying in power and getting those smart enough to help him be an effective king. He's uncannily good at the latter, almost as if he's deliberately trying. His family shrub was confusing to the point of being legendary. He is a third-generation royal, and I use that term loosely, whose grandparents were two sets of identical twins that had two children, who then brought Lofen into this world, committing adultery in the process. Each and every one of these individuals had inbreeding in their direct lineage as well. Thankfully, Lofen was the only child, so the inbreeding stopped with him. Not that I've heard of, and that kind of news would leave a pretty big splash. Hell, there's bets on whether or not Lofen's immortal. Now, how he's avoided that must be an entire fecking army of assassins at this point is beyond the ken of mortals. Regardless, someone else is definitely in charge this time around. Someone the craphead. Someone the shithead can't bully into being stupid. Any ideas who that could possibly be? Nope, but whoever it is definitely has a pair, so that eliminates the princess. Lofen's 3 sons were smarter than their father, but deathly afraid of him. That's only natural, considering that he's had a total of 7 children. Nothing will make you scared of your father more than watching him publicly execute your older brothers and sisters. Their upbringing by the inbred Bastard King had turned them into cowards. Unfortunately, intelligent cowards turn into very dangerous rulers. So only the Drow were hoping for Lofen to die. Damn, sounds like this fight with the Drow is going to have to be taken seriously, I said, leaning back in my seat. Sure as shit, Naya said with a sympathetic smile. Want a drink to take your mind off of it? He pulled out a flask and shook it. This particular flask was enchanted with a spell that caused it to refill itself with a very strong alcohol called tack, a cursed thing responsible for many forgotten nights and awkward mornings in my youth. I'm not about to go on a drunken bender when it's just afternoon, Laith, I spluttered. I'm not going to go on a drunken bender when it's just afternoon, Laith, I laughed. Plus, I've got an appointment soon. Oh, an appointment that you don't want to blow off. Do tell. Well, you've heard any rumors? Well, have you heard any of the rumors about a human? You're pulling my sack, the thing they pulled out of the fucking dungeon in the Louvre. That's the one, I grinned. It's registered as an adventurer and everything, so I've got an extra special job for it. It's on its way here right now. Well, feck me running. Don't suppose you'd let an old pal sit in look all quiet like? Come on, don't be like that. This might be the only chance I get to see it. Be a fucking pal, old Mark. I guess I could be convinced to let you stay. I rubbed my chin theatrically. If you could help convince the Emperor Jack to accept my proposal. Huh? You're trying to get married to Jack? Gosh damn it, no. My proposal regarding that thrice-cursed mine. He wants to send his boys to mine it out for a steep cut of the core. He wants to send his boys to mine it out for a steep cut of the ore. I want them to teach my boys how to mine more efficiently while giving him a more reasonable cut of the ore. Ah, crap. Had me all excited there for a second. Of course, it's about the fucking mine, though. Lath deflated. You know, he's just about obsessed with that fucking thing. It'll be hard to sell, but he owes me some pretty big favors. I'll give it my best shot. That's all that I can ask, I said. Fine, you are permitted to stay. As my old friend grinned in response to my decision, Raisin entered the room. Ah, perfect timing, I smiled. What is it? Your appointment has arrived, he said, eyeing Lath warily. He's going to be sitting in. Of course, Raisin sighed. The human has arrived along with his adoptive brothers and the over-20s. The over-20s have been paid out, and Yithith waits debriefing. Naluva has also sent a messenger for Naluva has sent a messenger for another matter. Lath's eyebrows raised, and I smiled slyly. Of course, he wouldn't have heard anything about that. A living thing coming out of a dungeon is national news that travels like wildfire. But a strong monster within a dungeon is business as usual. Send them in, I ordered. I'll meet with the messenger afterwards. Yes, High Chief, Raisin said, and left the room. Lath didn't even get a chance to interrogate me before Raisin returned, accompanied by Yithith, 2 other orcs, and a strange, pale-looking creature with dark hair and round ears. I quickly surmised that this must be the human. They stood next to each other in front of my desk, and Raisin adopted a very formal pose. I braced myself for what was coming. High Chief Urabark, son of Grosknal the Giant, savior of Kokena, slayer of dragons, decimator of conqueror of the Dragon's Jaw Giants, blood ally of Balasar, dear friend of the Empire of Calcutti, and high commander of the Kokena Adventurers Guild, I present you with Yithith Murloc, champion of Maloon, Nash, and Yoke Alter of Clan Alter, and Nick Smith of Clan Alter. And so you have, I replied. You may continue your duties. Thank you, High Chief, Raisin said with a bow and left the room. I gazed at my visitors. The 3 orcs were very well behaved, standing straight and keeping their eyes trained just above my head. Their parents taught them well. I turned my gaze to the human, who was also standing straight, but staring directly into my eyes as if he were my equal. As if it were my equal. This surprised me for a moment. You must be Nick Smith, adopted into Clan Alter, I said. Yes, sir. Well, Nick Smith, you must not have high chiefs where you are from. I say this because it is remarkably rude to look one in the eye. I smiled slightly. Unless, of course, you've known them for quite a long time. Have we met before? Good morning, Shadow Aura. I hope you're doing well today. No, sir. Its eyes left mine. Apologies, sir. No apologies necessary as long as corrections are made. Thank you for observing our customs, I said. Now, Yithith, go ahead with your report. Yes, High Chief, Yithith said. She began explaining the events of their mission, and I struggled to keep their stoic expression. A lost language, artificially intelligent machines fused with flesh, a human fighting the monster while the over-20 struggled. The fact that it wasn't actually the human fighting. The threats made by Clan Alter in regards to the human's well-being. And finally the fact that the monster in the dungeon was a horrifically altered human. By Bibby's balls, Lyth muttered under his breath once the report concluded. Indeed, I replied. Thank you, Yithith. You may go. Good morning, Anthony. Hope you're having a fantastic day, or as fantastic as possible. Yithith nodded, turned, and left the room. I looked at the remaining guests. Nick's face had an appearance of someone who'd just received startling information but was trying to hide their concern. Yulk and Nash looked completely unperturbed. Nash, Yulk, I began, you really shouldn't be throwing your clan's weight around like that. You and I both know that the decision to avenge you would have been a controversial one, to say the least. Yes, High Chief, Yulk said, but if I may be something in your... But if I may something in our... But if I may something... But if I may say something in our defense, I tried not to grin. Go right ahead. We weren't left with much choice. On our honor, we would have had to defend the boy against 4 over-20s. At least that's what we thought at the time. Yolk's cheeks twitched as he tried not to grin. If they had killed us, which they likely would have, our mother would have called for their blood. I'm led to believe that you personally know Yulda Alta. I couldn't help but wince at the mention of the flesh carver Yulda. Her spite is that of legend, and resisting her will is tantamount to trying to tell a waterfall to stop pouring. It was incredibly like her to randomly adopt a completely unknown creature that was discovered in a dungeon. Good morning, Bombardic Blood Raid. I hope you're doing well today. Yes, of course. She's done a lot for this chiefdom, I said. Well then, it's a good thing that you warned the adventurers off, I suppose. Hilda Alta, haven't seen her in years. How's she been, boys? Nice asked. She's been well, Nash answered, though she wanted me to tell you, High Chief, that she's displeased about the sudden summons of her sons, and she feels that she should get some more time to spend with her boys in her golden years. Oh, please, I laughed. She's probably thrilled to be having you follow in your father's footsteps, though I suppose I should make sparing use of you, just in case she comes at me with a slipper. The 2 orcs were close to breaking down with laughter, and the human actually smiled. Find a place to sit. I've got a mission for you, I said, pointing at the pile of cushions. The 3 of them grabbed a cushion, sat down, and looked at me expectantly. I couldn't help but smile when I noticed that Nick was still avoiding eye contact. It's a subtle shift from formal to informal, to be sure. You can look at me now, Nick. When I offer you a seat, things become a lot less formal, I explained. Oh, right, the boy stammered. Hi, Chief. I don't mean to be rude, but we do have our own mission to think of, York said. Oh, I asked. What would that be? We need to discover as much about Nick as possible. The language on the altar that Yusuf mentioned is likely Dracan. If we're to know what it says, we need to find a scholar who can read it. Well, what a coincidence, I grinned. End of story. Blip, 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 chapter. End of chapter. End of chapter. Thankfully, it's a shortish one. And the next one should also be a shortish one. But we've had new people join. Welcome, new people. Welcome. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. Feel free to chat in the chat and do chatty things. It helps the stream, keeps us entertained. And if we are not entertained, I mean chat, not me, then things go badly for me. I don't know. But seriously, if you have any questions, just ask, and then, if I think it's appropriate, I'll answer. Oh. Stabbing pain in ear. My biggest fear, well, not biggest fear, but one of my fears with power armor is just it's going to keep escalating in length. Seems to be that sort of story where each chapter seems to be just a little bit longer than the previous one. And that's how we got to where we are, where the chapters now are almost twice the length of the chapters when they started. Meow. What? You don't normally come down here. You're starving to death. You've only got 3 bowls of food. What a shame. The cat's starving to death. It's telling me this, even though I know for a fact that there are 3 strategically placed bowls of food around the house. Maybe it's telling me that it saw the bottom of the bowl, otherwise known as the black hole. No. It's not a lab cat, and it's also out of reach. So, sometimes okay, today is one of those times. What's your kitty? Here we go. And there we go. Up and down. Now he's just staring at me. Yeah, how dare you touch me? You are beneath me. I will never be... Oh, scratch. Scratch, give me a scratch. Oh, my God. But don't touch me again. Just scratch. Something like that. Now, I don't mean this in a bad way at all. I have often said, even to some authors, like the author of Accidentally Adopted, in my opinion, a web series, a proper web series, without end, is the literary equivalent to a soap opera. So, what web novels are to literacy, or literary, is what soap operas are to movies. Well, pictures, entertainment. So, they allow you to go into the minutiae of a universe. And that's great. In theory. So, now I've got a dog staring at me. And, I mean, the fact that there are still soap operas today means that there's always going to be an audience for them. So I think that Power Armor is leaning more on the soap opera side of it, where it is exceptionally slow. But it can be because it's a web series. That's my feeling. I could be wrong. No. Well, it just poked its head in, gave me a beady look, and went away. Just letting the hydration flow. Well, gurgle. Well, something like a multi-book series would be more like a TV show. So, something that's series, each book represents a series, and then a season. And then you got multiple seasons. In my opinion. I mean, this is just me. So, things like the Wheel of Time series, book 1 is season 1. And then I know that they made a TV series out of it. But true web novels that have no end, they only have story arcs. And they tend to be written more like a soap opera than a TV show. Like I said, I'm not talking down on this art. It's just, for me, having an entire short story's worth of exposition done in a voice destroys my voice. I could do lots of different voices for varying bits of time, but when each person is speaking in a different voice for what is essentially a short story, it just wrecks my voice. Completely destroys my voice. So it's not only that it's 30 minutes longer, it's 30 minutes of very heavy voice acting. So it wears more on my voice than, say, the human stuff. There are lots of different voices, but they're pretty short. You know, less than, I'd say, 20% of the whole chapter is voice acting, or 40%. Whereas Power Armor is the opposite. Almost all of it is spoken. So I have to voice act everything. So narration voice is my natural voice, which is the thing that I can do more of. And every other voice wears more on my voice. So my allotted daily budget gets used up quicker. And it just also puts more strain on the voice. If that makes any sense whatsoever. Gurgle, gurgle, stomach. Process the water. Coffee. Alrighty. Yeah. So, normally they talk about, you know, your natural voice. Your natural voice is just, say, 100% efficiency. This is what your body is not designed for, but it's what you're used to. It's what your muscles are used to. It's like doing an exercise that you do every single day. You can do 1,000,000 of them. But the further away from your natural voice you go, the more strain you put on your voice. So, the voice that, funny enough, the one that people like of mine the most, which is the Jonathan Hurt voice. This particular voice here. You know, Jonathan Hurt's talking about things, and you really should be doing something, and blah, 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 blah. It's a great voice. It destroys my natural voice. So I cannot do it for long periods of time. If I did, I would get vocal strain and just not be able to record. glass bottle. It had mixing cool drink in it. Not cool drink, whatever you want to call it. So a concentrate, juice concentrate in it, but it's a glass bottle. So once we used up the concentrate, I just used it to drink water. Better than a plastic bottle. And it's a good old lime glass, so if you drop it, you're not going to break it. Yeah, I don't need another voice surgery. I don't even think they could do another voice surgery. Well, they could, but I don't know whether they could correct much. So we have to be a bit more gentle on the voice. Yeah, it was a liquid. What was it? It was a tropical fruit, tropical punch, liquid, concentrate. And it was like 9-to-1. So you mix one of these to 9 parts water, and then you've got a tropical watery thing. It's to help me get water down, because I don't like water particularly. So making it taste like anything else is great, but tropical flavor gives me heartburn. So now I just drink water out of this until I get some caffeine-infused mixing stuff. And, yeah. Nice bottle. It's got a nice grip on it. You know, it fits in the hand nicely. That sucks, Brian. You know, we also get them in powder here. What's it? I do know American brand. Something made. Minute Maid. Made as in MAID. Minute Maid. Where you buy it in a can and it's concentrate and you pour it. I think it was called Minute Maid. Can't drink lemon, gives me heartburn. Well, it activates my acid reflux. So anything that activates my acid reflux I need to avoid. Because the acid damages the vocal cords. I don't think it was originally from Coke. But yes. So it was a frozen concentrate. And then you poured it. I'm pretty sure that was an American brand. But yeah, I mean, here it's not super common. South Africa, it's super common. There's a brand called Oros. Every kid knows Oros. The main one is nachi flavored, and then the second one is guava flavored. And it's basically just sugar and flavorant. But it's dirt cheap. And you can buy the concentrate in like 10-liter containers. So you just buy that for the month. Its mixing rate's like 8-to-1. Well, it depends on how concentrate they are. So in South Africa, again, it's where most of my experience is from. There were drinker pop, concentrate like this. But that was 20-to-1. So it was super, super concentrate. It was like you can make 2 liters from a little 100 milliliters or 50 milliliter bottle. Now, most of the mixing cool drinks are citrus related, and I can't drink citrus, so Tang, Drinker Pop, all of that stuff. Even some of the citrus ones just activate my heartburn or acid reflux. Yep. Hell, on bad days, water sets off my acid reflux, but that has to be a very bad day. Haven't had one of those days in a while. If my voice is sounding a bit iffy, I've got some gunk sitting on my vocal cords. Should cough it up soon, or clear it out. Normally a sign that I need some more water. That's why I'm occasionally turning to the side and shaking my head. It's because this crap on my vocal cords doesn't want to come up. It's not pointed at any person. Most of the time I'm fine. It's just some days are bad. And then I just drink water, just keep everything to a minimum. Not that today is a particularly bad day, I just had water. There's our antacid. There's one box. There's the pull form. Sitting on my desk, easy to reach. In South Africa, the liquid one is actually quite difficult to get. You don't get it in the bottles. In South Africa, I was drinking about 2 liters of that a month. A liter? I have no idea. It was more than a liter of it a month. But my voice doc was like, look, your acid reflux is pretty destroying your voice. So every time you eat, you take a swig of this. When you wake up, you take a swig of this. When you go to sleep, you take a swig of this. We're going to Diogi. Diogi, you want to say hi to chat? Nope. The doggy wants to be with my wife. But my wife went out shopping. So now it's annoying me. All right, on to the next chapter. Get my chair wedged in here so I don't roll around. Oh, that's not what we wanted. Stop. Undo. To close. Fair enough. Packet monsters are always hard. Difficult. Yeah. We seem to do that as well. I think it's just the VPN for me. 25. But yeah, sudden packet loss is never great. Okay, on to the next chapter. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest narration of the web series The Human from a Dungeon. If you are new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 25. High Chief Ulamog, Adventurer Level NA, Orc Kokenian. Well, what a coincidence, I grinned. The three looked at me curiously, and Lath raised an eyebrow. The most likely place to find someone who can read Drakon would be the Kingdom of Bolase, and that's exactly where I need you to go, I explained. Bolase, the elves? Lath asked. Yes, I need to send a request for reinforcements, I said. I had been worried that it would be seen as premature, but from what you just told me, the drow is... From what you just told me about the drow, it's best to act with haste. If you wanted reinforcements, why not ask? If you wanted reinforcements, why not send a messenger to Calcutti as well? Because if I ask for troops from Region Oakmar, he is to supply them. Because if I ask for troops from Region Oakmar, he has to supply them, I replied. Part of our blood pact includes a mutual defense treaty. But we have close relations with the Empire of Calcutti. Emperor Jack is not honor-bound to our defense. With everything that's been happening over that damned mind, I'm certain he'll require a game of 50 messengers before sending aid. With respect, that's fecking Hanash shit. Lath said, You and Jack may have your issues, but the people of Calcutti would have his head on a spike if it got out that he didn't send troops to your defense. I looked at the dwarf incredulously. He met my stare and held it stubbornly, quite confident that he was correct. It is true that our people are close friends, even living among one another near the border. But could they possibly be close enough to rebel against the Emperor for the sake of my people? I broke my gaze and rubbed my chin thoughtfully. All right, I finally said. I'll have you talk to Emperor Jack for me. Wait, feck. Fine, fair enough, you got me. I grinned at the dwarf and turned back to the other three. York was the only one who didn't look confused. Nick was doing a better job of hiding his confusion, and then Nash. Sweetie Fairy and the Caffeine Fairy. Being naughty, getting me sweeties. And she's gone. Well, she's taking the dog with her. Sweetie Fairy. Wait, oh yes, boomer juice. Oh! So good. And then Nash. Fusion, and then Nash. Nick was doing a better job at hiding his confusion than Nash was, but that's probably because he has absolutely no idea what any of us are talking about. It's not particularly important that they understand the scope of this mission, but I suppose the little history lesson is in order. We have bad history with the Kingdom of the Night. Their king is a long-lived inbred bastard known as Yumluffen. His family has ruled ever since the Drow won control of the region from the vampires, and every once in a while they try to conquer their neighbors. Nope. It's the sweeties I was talking about the other day. The coconut caramel baked good things. Called pastry de Fajal? Well, it's a pastillas, which is pastry, de, which is the, or of. So pastry of the Fajia. There you go. And every once in a while, every once in a while, they try to conquer their neighbors. It's usually just a matter of fighting off a bunch of conscripted peasants until they run out of blood to spill. But it seems this time around things are going to be a little different. The forbidden treats, yes. Nick looked concerned, and he raised his hand unexpectedly. I stared at him, mouth agape, trying to figure out what the hell he was doing. Nash turned to look at the boy and was also surprised and confused. It took the human a second to realize the source of our confusion, and he slowly put his hand down and cleared his throat. Sorry, there's vampires, like bloodsuckers, and that turn other people into vampires, he asked. Burn up in the sun, afraid of garlic, and crow holy symbols. Yes, I mean, no, I stammered. There are vampires, and they do drink blood, but most aren't harmed by the sun, and none of them are harmed by holy symbols. I don't know what garlic is, so that might be afraid of it. Can you kill them by driving a stake through their heart? He asked. I don't know how you would... This is one of my favorite jokes from Terry Pratchett, by the way. I don't know how you would even begin to shove a stake through someone's heart, but no, they're able to quickly regenerate. You need to inhibit their movement by removing their head and then incinerate them, I answered. Easier said than done, though. They're incredibly fast and strong. Some of them can turn people into vampires too, Lath added. You forgot that bit. I looked at him, and he grinned at me. He was enjoying how thrown off I was by this interruption. I cleared my throat. Well, that's enough about vampires. They're hardly relevant. It's not as if they're going to be attacking alongside the drow, I trailed off. Someone who wouldn't care about Lofin's opinions and want to conquer new lands that he would have difficulty controlling. Someone. Lofin's opinions. Greetings. Oh, wrong button. Someone who wouldn't care about Lofin's opinions and want to conquer new lands that he would have difficulty controlling. Could the vampires be making a power play at the Night Kingdom? I looked at Lath, and his expression told me he caught on to my line of thinking. Lofin's newest general might be a vampire. But how? But how? Listen, I said, grabbing a letter from my desk. Your mission is to get to the Kingdom of Palliser as fast as possible and deliver this letter to Regent Oakmar. You'll have to take the main road. The adventurer's path has been blocked by a rock slide, and we're having difficulty getting it cleared. Once you've delivered this letter, you're free from your obligations to me, and may return to your payment at... And may return for your payment at your convenience. What's the pay going to be? Yulk asked. 3 gold each, one paid up front for travel costs, I replied. See reason for that. Nath let out a low whistle. That's a lot of money for delivering a message. I'll need to raise my rates. Don't you dare, I growled playfully. I'm paying them extra because I'm being selfish in giving them this job. Now, you 3, do you understand the task? Yes, High Chief, they said in unison. Good. Here, I said, handing the letter to Yulk. This should go without saying, but don't open it. If you break the seal, Regent Oakmar might be able to squirm out of his obligations. Not that he would, but it's better not to tempt fate. Understood, the sorceress said. Understood, the sorceress said, putting the letter in his robe. I wanted to have a longer conversation, but something has come up, I explained. Come see me after you finish your task and collect your payment. I waved at them to go, and they did. Once the door closed, I turned to my dwarven confidant. Do you think the reason that the drow have suddenly become organized is due to a vampire? I asked. I mean, it makes sense, but at the same time, it really fucking doesn't, he answered. Drow can't become vampires, right? That's how they were able to boot the suckers out in the first place, isn't it? Well, a vampire can't convert a drow. But what happens if they were to breed? Oof! A half-drow, half-vamp would be a weak little thing. Not exactly the kind of strength that would inspire a military. No, but a weakling would be the exact type of drow that King Lopen would handpick to lead his armies. He doesn't like strong generals because they become a threat to his dominance, I pointed out. Crap! If he didn't know that it was a vampire and it was born to nobility, it would be a shoo-in. So what? We've got an imminent vampiric coup in the Night Kingdom. No. They need a place to gather their strength before making a move against Lopen. Preferably somewhere that the king wouldn't have difficulty exerting influence over. Preferably somewhere the king would have difficulty exerting influence over. And a place with plenty of potential vampire spawn. Like the High Chieftain Kenna, for instance. Why would they go about it in such a weird way, though? Wouldn't it make more sense just to start turning farmers into the... Wouldn't it make more sense to just start turning farmers on their borders? No. If you're a vampire and you want to create enough vampires to make an army, you need control over the populace. You would need to be a noble, king, governor, or a conquering general, I said. I need to go to Emperor Jack and let him know about this possibility and request his aid. Oh, and don't forget about the damned mine. Of course, Leith laughed as he stood up. I'll get his ass into I'll get his ass into gear one way or another. See you later. Have a good journey. As Leith left my office, Raisin entered. I raised an eyebrow at him. What is it? I asked. The messenger that arrived with the human, he explained. Do you want me to send him in? Another Nulovan messenger, huh? I asked. What does he want? I'm sure that he can tell you himself, High Chief, Raisin entreated. I'm sure that he can tell you that himself, High Chief. Raisin treated me to a withering glare. I chuckled. All right, send him in. Raisin professionally rolled his eyes at my antics and left the room, soon returning with the messenger in question. High Chief Willimark, son of Creshnor, he began. Enough, I interrupted. What is it, messenger? What is it, messenger? What is it, messenger? Yeah. Raisin looked annoyed at my messenger. Raisin looked annoyed as the messenger straightened and started above. Raisin looked annoyed as the messenger straightened and stared above my head. He took a moment to gather his nerves. High Chief Willimark, Chief Gluhan of Nuluva, would like to request that Nuluva be formally recognized as a village, and now meets the population and commerce requirements. It wasn't already, I jotted. Wasn't already, I jokingly asked. No, High Chief, Raisin said flatly, though Chief Gluhan's been doing his best to have it considered as such. However, at the moment, it is considered a settlement and isn't eligible for benefits of being a village. Well, it's not exactly open to attack, so that must be after the business benefits. I doubt that they say no to a garrison of troops, High Chief. True enough, I sighed. Of course, they wouldn't say no to a garrison. The soldiers would be getting money from Kokena and spending it in Nuluva. A drop in the bucket for us, but one hell of a boon for an up-and-coming village. Nuluva had already grown pretty rapidly, and becoming a village would likely make it grow even faster. Cluherne's done a hell of a job. Fine, return to Chief Cluherne and tell him Nuluva is now a village, I said. Let him know the garrison will have to wait until the drow are dealt with. Yes, High Chief. Raisin guided the messenger out of the office, and I was once again left alone with my thoughts and my mountain of paperwork. The human head looked interesting, shaped like a short elf, but it was missing the tinge of green in its skin and eyes, and its ears were round. Those eyes were strange, piercing and blue, a stark contrast to its black hair. A shade of blue I'd never seen in eyes before. It's obvious that it's from a foreign land. Perhaps I'll be able to ask it about that upon... Perhaps I'll be able to ask it about that upon its return. I put the human from my mind and set about the task of filling out the paperwork that surrounded me. All of it was boring. Things like requisition forms that I really should be delegating, approvals and denials for proposals and tax stuff. There were some seemingly exciting papers, like the disposition of soldiers and training permissions and things of that nature. Unfortunately, these only sound exciting until you have to be the one to fill them out. It was rare that I could simply sign something and be done with it. I yawned as I set a large stack of papers I'd just completed in my pile. I yawned as I set the large stack of papers I'd just completed in my done pile. I smiled in satisfaction at the dent I had made, and Raisin entered the room holding a stack twice the size to one of the... And Raisin entered the room holding a stack twice the size of the one I'd just completed. What the hell is that? I demanded as he set the stack on my side of the done pile. I demanded as he set the stack on my side to be done pile. These are the forms to officially make Nuluva a village, he replied. There's the recognition forms, tax forms, requests for updates to the various maps on the High Chiefdom, and of course congratulatory letters to the village leaders. So, what you're saying is that I made more work for myself by doing benevolent. What you're saying is that I made more work for myself by being benevolent to the people of Nuluva. Yes, High Chief, Raisin said with a malicious smile. No good deed goes unpunished. Damn it. End of story. End of chapter. Alrighty. And is that done? Now we sit and recover and chat. Ooh. 3. Big yawn. Okay, we're going to start with the first battle chapter of Because Someone Had to. The first battle chapter, 1. 1 of 3. But I'll push them all into one of 7 series. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest narration. Excuse me. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of... Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Re-Tifos, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is part of a 7-part series, and this is part 3, called Because Someone Had to. The First Battle. Admiral to the fleet, I've nothing to say that the politicians haven't already. Today we fire the first shots in a war that we've been preparing for years. You know your duty and what's at stake. Do your children proud. The human admiral, a stately woman of steel-grey hair and sharp features, stood on the bridge of the Independence, the largest carrier in the Terran fleet. The ship's captain continued to see the vessel's preparations for the coming battle. I've done this? This seems very, very familiar. No, I haven't. Okay. Preparations for the coming battle. The Admiral surveyed the fleet on a holographic display. 50 weapons, the best humanity could produce, were arranged in the formations and were arranged in their formations, and the carrier group was deploying squadrons of strike craft. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. The punitive fleet had almost 3 times the tonnage of her fleet, and would employ tactics and formations that had been proven in combat for centuries. But they were fractured. Each Senate species... Why is... Just give me a second. I swear I've read this already, recently. But they were fractured. Each Senate species ships operated as an independent entity, rather than an extension of the whole. The Grand Admiral would be commanding the ship on which they rode, as well as dictating orders to the rest of the fleet. Orders that would then be interpreted differently by every sub-admiral, who in turn commanded their own ship and their own fleet. They would be slow to respond to changes in battle. The opening salvo from the human fleet came in the form of more electronic warfare. The Admiral glanced to her left, to the holographic display of the ship's combat AI, modeled after the ancient goddess Athena, who was coordinating with the 5 other combat AIs of their... Okay. What the hell's going on? Okay. This is the last part of the previous chapter. Let me just check. What do we say? Because of okay, so Admiral to Fleet. Move that. Admiral to Fleet. Human Admiral. Human Admiral. The Admiral surveyed. The Admiral surveyed. But they were fractured. But they were fractured. These are two different chapters, by the way. The opening salvo. The opening salvo. The second salvo. The second salvo. Depleted uranium. Depleted uranium. And waves of spycraft. Okay. So this paragraph is different. All the others before it are the same. 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines? Yep. Coherently, coherently. The battle. The battle, okay. So it looks like he's copied and pasted most of the last bit of the human bit of the previous chapter. And then from here, it is new. Good morning, Joseph. I hope you're doing well. Okay, so what we're going to do is this. Greetings, ladies and middlegents, and welcome to the latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Because Someone Had To, and this is a supplementary chapter, 1 of 3, about the extended version of the battle in the previous chapter. The first part of this chapter is the same as the last part of the previous chapter, so I am cutting that out, and I'm continuing from where it is new. So, if you'd like to have a cohesive story, follow the playlist, and it should all make sense. I hope this all does make sense to you, and I hope you enjoy. Anyways, on to the story. Depleted uranium penetrators were launched at fractions of the speed of light, flashed across the void towards the enemy fleet, meant more to force the enemy out of formation than to actually strike the enemy ships. And waves of strikecraft fanned out ahead of the human fleet, racing towards the Reading Council fleet, carrying payloads of high-yield nuclear warheads that would soon seed the battle space with pulses of electromagnetic radiation, both to further scramble the enemy's senses and to obscure the advance of the human fleet. The ensuing battle was brief and bloody. In only a few short hours, the punitive force was shattered, 2/3 of its numbers crippled and destroyed. But humanity had underestimated the Senate species' dedication to the Council's directives, or perhaps their fear of reprisal or failure. No, this is still the same thing. No, it's not. Okay. Where damaged human ships would withdraw, Senate vessels have no idea what's going on. I'll just read it. Or perhaps live here. Because this should be quite long. No, yes, no, yes. Significantly longer than the previous chapter. Reprisal or failure. I am thoroughly confused what the feck is going on. Okay. Waves of strike craft, blah blah blah. Armor penetrating missiles. So this paragraph is the one, it's slightly different. All of this is copy and paste. It's actually not that much. Okay. Start this again. Greetings, ladies and milligents, and welcome to this latest narration of the web serial. Nope. Greetings, ladies and milligents, and welcome to this latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is a subplot. This particular story is called Because Someone Had To, and has 3 supplemental chapters to the battle in the previous chapter. The first part of this chapter is similar to the previous part, but from a different perspective. Anyways, I hope that you enjoy. Admiral to the fleet, I have nothing to say the politicians haven't already. Today we fire the first shots at a war we have been preparing for years. You know your duty and what's at stake. Do your children proud. The human admiral, a stately woman of steel-grey hair and sharp features, stood on the bridge of the Independence, the largest carrier in the Terran fleet. The ship's captain continued to see the vessel's preparations for the coming battle. The admiral surveyed the fleet on a holographic display. 50 warships, the best humanity could produce, were arrayed in their formations, and the carrier group was deploying squadrons of strike craft. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. The punitive fleet had almost 3 times the tonnage of her fleet, and would employ tactics and formations that had been proven in combat for centuries. But they were fractured. Each Senate species ships operated as an independent entity rather than an extension of the whole. The Grand Admiral would be commanding the ship on which they rode, as well as dictating orders to the rest of the fleet. Orders that would then be interpreted differently by every sub-admiral, who in turn commanded their own ship and their own fleet. They would be slow to respond to changes in the battle. The opening salvo from the human fleet came in the form of more electronic warfare. The Admiral glanced to her left, to the holographic display of the ship's combat AI, modeled after the ancient goddess Athena, who was coordinating with the 5 other combat AIs of the fleet. They barraged the punitive fleet with signals and false readings, actively infiltrating the communications network and wreaking havoc on their ship's ability to function coherently. The second salvo was kinetic. Torpedoes leapt ahead, arcing high above or below the plane of punitive force was relayed. The second salvo was kinetic. Torpedoes leapt ahead, arcing high above or below the plane of the punitive fleet. The second salvo was kinetic. Torpedoes leapt ahead, arcing high above or below the plane the punitive fleet was arrayed along, before coming to a stop and going dark, waiting to pounce when Athena and her siblings gave the signal. Depleted uranium penetrators were launched at fractions of the speed of light, flashing across towards her. Depleted uranium penetrators were launched at fractions of the speed of light, flashing across the void towards the enemy fleet, meant more to force the enemy out of formation than to actually strike the enemy ships. And waves of strike craft fanned out ahead of the human fleet, racing towards the Reading Council fleet, carrying payloads of high-yield nuclear warheads and armor-penetrating missiles. Counselor, the human fleet is advancing. They have launched kinetic weapons at the Shaldanta fleet, and they are maneuvering to avoid the kinetic spotted trajectories. The Grand Admiral stood in the center of the bridge, assessing the advancing human fleet, while his crew processed the chosen courses of action of the dozen-member race fleets and made that information available to him. He, in turn, had ordered his own fleet to adjust course, and nodded in approval as the various sub-admirals' formations made orderly course corrections. It had fanned the punitive fleet out. It had fanned the punitive fleet out across a larger frontage, but they would continue to advance as those useless kinetics flashed through the region his fleet no longer occupied. "You are all running from the first shots these young upstarts fire, your Grand Admiral." You are all running from the first shots these young upstarts fire, Grand Admiral. Afraid of such crude weapons? Victory is assured. Start acting like it. The Councillor's tone was sharp, acid-laced, threatening. The Grand Admiral was quickly reminded that anything short of a perfect and aggressive victory would likely not be well rewarded, nor would letting his ship near enough to the enemy's guns put the nor would letting his ship near enough to the enemy's guns be nor would letting his ship nor would letting his ship near enough the enemy's guns to put the Councillor at risk, meaning that he would have to hang back and allow the sub-admirals and their member race fleets to do the brunt of the work. The humans had a mere 50 ships, some too small to even be called proper warships, much like the pathetic ramshackle crafts of the Shaldanta fleet. But two rivaled even the Grand Admiral's command in ship and size. But two rivaled even the Grand Admiral's command ship in size. They were strikingly different in design. One knife-shaped and long, its surface layered in what his staff were certain were weapons batteries. Some sort of battleship. He had to assume. Some sort of battleship, he had to assume. It would receive the most attention from his fleet guns. The other, a massive rectangular thing, was covered in what seemed to be loading bays, a mobile repair and fueling ship, perhaps, one capable of serving an entire fleet. It was a sure sign that the human fleet was acting far beyond its operational boundaries, and without one ship would surely never have been able to operate so long from... And without that one ship would surely never have been able to operate so far from known human space. We will make an example of that warship at the fore of the human formation. Our weapons will tear it asunder, and the rest of the fleet will surrender to you, Councillor. The Grand Admiral was confident of this. His people had never known defeat, after all. They were the most powerful of the Alliance species. The Councillor was the most powerful on the Council. They had dozens of slave species, controlled hundreds of worlds. The humans would soon learn the hard way the error of their cause. Of course, there was still the question of what had happened to his fleet mere minutes before the human fleet had arrived. The false reports, the fading senses, the fact that his ships had fired upon each other. Despite the strange signal that his newly appointed communications technician had found, he simply could not believe that it had been the case. Humans surely could not have had any part of it. His gaze locked on the two-dimensional display of the human fleet, which hung on a monitor above him. The enemy's fleet continued to advance at the same speed as it would have. The enemy's fleet continued to advance at the same speed as when it had first appeared. The display tracked the kinetic projectile's advance. His crew estimated the moment his fleet would pass those useless hunks of metal, no more dangerous than a meteor to a ship that could simply move out of the way. There was a brief flicker of the image. Nothing changed. No delays, no ships out of position, no loss of information. The human fleet continued to advance. The member race fleets continued to outmaneuver the crude kinetic weapons. Inform the sub-admirals to mark the enemy. Inform the sub-admirals to mark the enemy's large craft for the priority target, and good hunting. Loki has infiltrated their communications networks, Admiral. He is downright giddy, ma'am. They have so many holes in their security nets because it has to be compatible with each member race's own systems to allow them to cooperate. Athena and the fleet's other 5 combat AIs reported directly to the Admiral, despite technically being housed on 6 different ships in the fleet. Athena called the battleships Georges.
Georgios.
Okay. Athena called the battleship Georgios Averof home. Well, Loki's home was actually the supercarrier Hermes, although the mischievous AI was currently gallivanting about through the Alliance's communications network. laying the groundwork for this trick. The three of the other four AIs were working closely with squadron commanders, directing the stealth torpedoes and coordinating squadrons of drone strike craft that worked in tandem with the human-piloted fighters and bombers. The last had yet to arrive, but wasn't far behind. Athena, in turn, was the most senior of the fleet's AI staff, and she coordinated and assisted the Admiral, acting in part as one of her own support staff, that she was willing to entrust to the Georgios. That she was willing to trust the Georgios Averoff to her human crew was a sign of the trust and faith she had in their abilities. It was, after all, her home. The Admiral only smiled, her hands dancing across the three-dimensional holographic display of both her and the enemy's fleets. Data markers, ship symbols and squadron numbers, intricate series of colored lines marking trajectories and weapon ranges. Around her, her staff worked to get the finishing touches on the formations and targeting priorities for the dozens of squads of piloted craft that were now swarming ahead of the Hermes. Movement of the subformations of destroyers and cruisers, all meant to lure the enemy into the Georgios' Averoff their Georgios. All meant to lure the enemy in on the Georgios Averoff. Athena asked Loki to be ready to begin in 10 minutes, and informed Captain Everett to ready the Georgios Averoff's main cannons. These arrogant bastards were kind enough to break up their formations for us, but I want them shaken up a bit before the hounds arrive. She again glanced at the powerful AI, fashioned after an ancient Greek goddess of war, and shared a smile with the holographic image. Of course, Admiral, Athena smiled, as she studied the tracker of Convoom. As she studied the tracker on Convoom's Bambutis, people created... Okay. Pronouns. 2 times in one chapter. That's...
Convoom.
I was right. Convoom. As she studied the tracker of Convoom's Bambutis, people create a deity and the greater hunter, telemetry and position. Grand Admiral, the newly appointed communications officer, sat in the station of his former colleague, studiously ignoring the dried blood on the seat and poorly scrubbed from the monitors. The Siluan's technician studied the readings his station provided with intent curiosity, as the reports of the ships of the Siluan's fleet were providing seemed to contradict each other. As the reports the ships of the Siluan's fleet were providing seemed to contradict each other. But every time he received such a report and flagged it for the Grand Admiral's attention, the file would vanish or suddenly be located in a different location. He frowned for a moment, then scaled the scaled flesh along his snout, putting away from the rows of misaligned fangs, chewed hands, curling and scraping nervously against the flanks of his controls. The Grand Admiral and the punitive fleet ignored the technicians as the myriad of captains of the Siluan's portion of the fleet petitioned for their right to lead the vanguard against the large human warship, even as 2 fleets continued to close in on each other, and the other member race fleets advanced on their own routes, following the plans of their individual admirals. Grand Admiral, I think, he snarled in annoyance, waved off the captains and turned to the technician. He could feel the counselor's eyes on him, an impatient glare. What is it, Sigler? What is so important? I think there is something wrong with our... He didn't get to finish. The sensor technician suddenly leapt up from his own console. The sensor technician suddenly leapt from his own console, twirling towards the Grand Admiral. The thrown spear is hit. The Grand Admiral suddenly lost all interest in the communications technician's pointless ramblings, instead turning to a new distraction, anger and confusion welling up at him. "What? Show me!" The sense attack transferred it to the Grand Admiral's monitors, where it replaced the reported courses of the member race fleets. On the screen, a Siluan's warship was tumbling and breaking apart. It had been struck almost head-on, and the vessel had warped and twisted from both the sudden force of the impact and the briefly continued push from the main engines. Even as he watched, detonations tore the engines free of the spiraling ship, and for one almost comical moment, they lunged away from a dead craft before detonating. "What caused this?" He turned on the sensors operator, prowling across the bridge to the suddenly nervous technician's station. "It was a large human ship, Grand Admiral. It was detected almost the same time as the thrown spear was hit." The technician scrambled to show the towering commander the imagery of what had happened. A bright flash of light at the nose of the large human warship, and only a few seconds later the thrown spear was floundering. His mind raced to understand what had happened. The humans were still minutes away from entering his fleet's longest weapons ranges, and even once in range of those furthest reaching guns, there was little chance of actually hitting anything. But the humans clearly didn't need to work under the same limitations. He watched the imagery replay a second time, and then the image changed. The human ship was closer, and the same flash of light pulsed from its prow. One of the Shaldanta warships exploded next, the ramshackle craft simply disintegrating into a rapidly expanding cloud of debris. The ramshackle craft simply disintegrating into a rapidly expanding cloud of debris, and the rest of the Shaldanta fleet immediately began to spread out, swaying through space much like the movement of a sea creature through water. "All ships, the punitive fleet, evasive actions. All ships of the punitive fleet, evasive actions. Athena, compliment your crew for me, would you? First blood goes to the Georgius. First blood goes to the Georgius Averoff." The Admiral flashed a predatory grin as she watched the second enemy ship die. One of her staff glanced up at an old war clock mounted on the wall, then sent orders to the sub-formations to begin their next phase of movements. Naturally, although the clock itself was ancient, practically had required some modernization of its inner mechanisms, ensuring its accuracy. "Of course, Admiral. Loki reports he is ready to begin, and the Hound should be here shortly." Athena, AI, smiled as well. Less predatory, but coldly. Less predatory, but coldly confident of what the outcome would be. The enemy fleet was so slow to respond, so easily infiltrated. Too many commanders, each trying to do everything themselves. They were about to learn many important lessons the hard way, she was certain. "Loki may begin, and ask him to stop changing my desktop backgrounds, would you?" First Destroyer Group consisted of 5 warships. They were built for speed, meant to go in close and hit hard before racing away. Skirmishers, meant to harass the enemy center or work around their flanks. And the 5 ships were racing towards one of the enemy's many separate formations. A dozen craft belonging to one of the many member races, little more than well-treated slaves to the Council species. Captain Granger. Captain Granger almost felt bad for them. The crews aboard those ships were simply doing what they had to be. Captain Granger almost felt bad for them. The crews aboard those ships were simply doing what they had been taught was right. They were fighting to maintain the order of things, everything they knew and believed in. He could hate them for that, but he could pity them. They had never been shown a better way, were ignorant of the possibility of such a thing. And they wouldn't be alive to see the sort of future their children would have. It was a sobering thought, one that he had spent many hours in confessions and discussions with the ship's chaplain. But he had come to terms with it. War was a terrible thing, but sometimes violence could open the door to peace. "All hands, the Hounds are expected to arrive shortly. Nav, full speed. We need to close the distance. Ready weapons. As soon as any enemy ships can be confirmed in as an F-kill. can be confirmed as an F-kill, fighting kill, allow them a chance to reach any escape pods they may have, or to try and quit the battle themselves. He sat on the bridge of his ship and glanced to the green screen, and glanced to a screen that showed him the trajectories or the status of the other ships of the first destroyer group. A few squadrons from the Hermes had moved in to join them, and they flew in the wake of the destroyers, ready to race ahead or provide close support, depending on how the enemy responded. The enemy ships were piecemeal and haphazardly built, and some looked very old indeed, as if they had been overhauled continuously over many generations of owners. They had also been the first of the enemy formations to begin evasive maneuvers to avoid the Georgios Avarov's main guns, a sign that, at least compared to other many commanders of the fleets, enemy's fleet, this one was a bit quicker on the uptake, but not quick enough. Convoom technically shared his AI software across multiple drone vessels. The more that were gathered in the formation, the more of them assigned to his control, the more computational power the AI had. He had never been assigned more than 3. For this battle, he had 12. Using an experimental FTL relay, each drone craft could travel almost instantaneous to aligned beacons, because, like the microsatellites that had been seeded along the edges of human space, awaiting the arrival of the enemy fleet. The Shaldunta fleet unknowingly advanced through a second cloud of those tiny satellites. They didn't know that Loki had already begun infiltrating their communications network, spreading through the enemy's fleet like a virus. He worked subtly, creating false telemetry reports, creating delays in various systems, but many of the enemy ships didn't rely as heavily on automation as his human fleets. He couldn't directly influence systems. He couldn't directly influence systems that relied entirely on mortal crews to function, or that weren't directly interfaced into the communication systems. Luckily, sensors were, and sensors could be easily fooled. The flash of fight. Why are we recording? Randomly recording. The flash, as in OBS is recording. Fooled. The flash of light of the arrival of the Convoom and its hounds cast shadows of the lead Shaldunta ships. The flash of light of the arrival of Convoom and his hounds cast shadows of the lead. The flash of light and the arrival of Convoom and his hounds cast shadows of the lead Shaldunta ship's bridge crew on the back wall. Many raised their arms to shield their eyes, despite the automatic tinting of the windows to shield them from harm. They barely had a chance to process the sudden appearance of 12 impossibly sleek, tiny warships, each smaller than the Shaldunta warship. An impressive feat, considering an adult Shaldunta stood about waist height to a human adult. The 12 hounds appeared already moving at full speed and flashed past the lead Shaldunta ship to plunge into the fleet in its wake, demonstrating an ability to calculate firing solutions, load and launch payloads, and maneuver that was far outstripped anything the Shaldunta could manage. The crew of the lead ship. Good morning, Alpha Noob. I hope you're doing well today. Sorry, I interrupted myself. I hope you're doing well today. Anything the Shaldunta could manage. The crew of that lead ship were hardly able to process that those ships had even arrived before the shields were raked with thousands of 1-kilogram kinetic penetrators. The Shaldunta warship shields flashed brightly and vanished in an instant. And those same penetrators, moving at tens of thousands of kilometers a second in the exact opposite direction of the Shaldunta ship, itself moving tens of thousands of kilometers a second towards those penetrators, vanished in a cloud of debris as fast as the shields had vanished. The second and third ship in the Shaldunter formation didn't fare much better. The Grand Admiral tried not to tuck his chin under the Councillor's glare, a natural reaction meant to protect one's fragile throat to a more aggressive male, and an embarrassingly cowardly feature to see in the full day. Yippee! Weekend! Woo! Weekend's always awesome. Oh, days off always awesome. And an embarrassingly cowardly feature to see in the full task to lead the first punitive fleet assembled in hundreds of years. The Councillor wasn't even sure why the Grand Admiral was so worried. Certainly, he had lost a few ships already and had yet to even fire a shot in return. But the battle was early yet. But the battle was early yet. Of course, should the humans prove to have any more surprises that the most experienced commander in all of Siluan's fleet could not anticipate, the fool would have reason to start thinking about hiding his throat from him. The Councillor remained in the lavish seat aboard the flagship's bridge, idly scraping dried blood from the scales of his hand or from under his claw, while the Grand Admiral delivered his report of the fleet's progress. He had nothing flattering to say to the Senate race fleets. The Senate member species had assembled fleets of their best crews and bravest commanders, all tasked to further their species' value to council races by any means necessary. Despite that, they had begun to fall apart as they neared the human fleet, slow to respond to orders, slow to maneuver and push towards the humans, slow to share their sensor data. Yet more evidence of how inferior they were, how much like foolish game animals they were. And then something changed, a flash of light, distant and certainly minutes old by the time he saw it. Confusion rocked the Grand Admiral and his crew, and the sensor operator clearly had no idea what was going on, despite how close the pulse had been. Despite how close that pulse of light had been. The Councillor was no master of fleets and tactics, but it was obvious the Grand Admiral was not nearly as qualified as the Siluan's Emperor had been led to believe. And then something else changed. The tactical displays and sensor reports flickered and refreshed, displaying very different information than they had mere moments before. The communications operator let out a pleased, if frustrated hiss at the same time. Grand Admiral, the humans are interfering with our system somehow. The Councillor's gaze locked onto the tactical display of the Grand Admiral's station. A dozen unknown ships were tearing through the Shildunter fleet, with 3 of their numbers destroyed and 4 others damaged as those unknown ships passed through the tiny aliens' formation, far too fast to be safe for their crews. And a formation of human ships had rapidly closed the distance, already entering weapons range of those debris field. Already entering weapons range of the debris field that was the lead Shildunter vessel. And weapons locks warnings were flashing on the ship of the Killian Consortium, as the 17 vessels represent 5 different economic powerhouses scattered to escape dozens of previously stealth torpedoes. Many of those ships scattered the wrong way, and threw themselves into the path of another formation of human warships that had closed much faster than the Grand Admiral's crew had been tracking previously. The communications operator called over 2 additional crew to help sort through the sudden rush of reports and messengers from the rest of the fleet. The large human warship let out another flash of light, and a second Siluan's warship was struck at a glancing blow which tore away meters of armored hull and an entire wing and 1 of 3 main engines, causing the vessel to list and begin to spiral as it surged forward towards and Good morning, Wolf. I hope you're doing well. As it surged forward and away from its original course. He simply sat and watched as the Shildunter fleet struggled to break away from the sudden enemy strike, while the Killian's Consortium fleet scattered and was overrun by more human warships, while that large warship at the center, with its impossible main guns, continued to approach directly into the heart of the punitive fleet's formation. Watched as the Grand Admiral floundered into uncertainty, visibly shaken by how suddenly everything was changing. Watched while a member of the worker class, one of the lowest silo in society, worked the communications terminal and, although clearly struggling due to its lower intelligence common to such pitiful low castes, was working actively to deal with the problem. It was disgusting. First destroyer group to form up on Valiant, close to 500 kilometers, and advance to engagement speed. Captain Granger's fingers danced through the holographic command relay next to his seat, making minor adjustments to the group's formation and target priorities. Convoom's formation of hounds had punched clear through the enemy formation, leaving a pair of enemy warships floundering in the wake, and many of the others struggling to repair spot fractures of their shields and hull breaches from the impacts of their scatterable munitions, lovingly nicknamed ball bearings for obvious reasons. The enemy vessels, the Shaldunta, had put up a fight. One of the hounds was lost in the brief second that they passed through the enemy fleet, and 2 others were damaged. An impressive fleet, considering both the sheer speed the hounds moved at and the reaction speed of their controlling AI. First destroyer group met enemy at almost the same moment as the second destroyer group, which descended upon the Killian Consortium's fleets, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. The Valiant closed at the distance. The Valiant closed with the 4 other destroyers on her flanks, catching up from behind the Shaldunta fleet. The Valiant closed with the 4 other destroyers on her flanks, catching up from behind the Shaldunta fleet, and Granger nodded to the weapons officer as they came within range. Deck guns raised from their armored housings and spun to bring the nearest enemy ship to bear. Flashes of heat from the barrels was answered by the flaring and shattering of the Shaldunta ship's shields, already weakened by the passing of the hounds. Its hull twisted and melted, chunks were cast away. The ship's outer hull, made of haphazardly layered slabs of salvage modules, it dropped speed immediately, though, and suddenly fell away from the Valiant's weapons arcs, and its own weapons flashed kinetic penetrators against the destroyer's shields. The navigator was forced to alter course to avoid a field of debris the enemy ship had cast off, which briefly exposed their weaker rear shields to the enemy's fire, which was directed ahead and along the Valiant's course, knowing it was better to let the Valiant run into kinetics rather than to try fire-chasing shots from the rear. Their weapons may have been far behind what the humans could field, but the crews were no fools and knew how to employ them and how to think on their feet. Admiral, first destroyer group is clear of the Shaldunta formation. No major damage reported. 3 additional enemy ships are confirmed sunk. Athena smiled with pride as the first destroyer group raced ahead of the Shaldunta fleet and began circling around, intent on making another pass through their formation. Convoom's hounds were racing towards the next formation in the enemy's fleet, a loose formation of bulky, heavily armored warships of the Warilia, a predator-evolved species of thick hides and bony plates, known to kill their prey by wearing them down or crushing them under their massive weight. Their ships followed the same mentality as their evolution, fast in short bursts, coated in thick armor meant for brutal close-in fighting. Another species eager to prove its usefulness to the Council races, eager to earn itself a higher station. The Admiral nodded as she in turn made the finishing touches to the main fleet's formation. The second destroyer group had met fiercer resistance, as one of the Killian Consortium's vessels, engines damaged by chaser fire from the second, floundered on its course and crossed into the path of the Testament. The crew of the Testament had barely avoided a full collision, instead scraping across the enemy ship's hull as both vessels' shields had flared out and died on impact. The Testament was damaged but still able to maneuver at speed and had begun to break off from the second destroyer group to make its way back towards the main fleet's rear and away from the battle. We will still be entering range, We will be entering range of the enemy's long-range weapons shortly, ma'am. One of her staff had finished studying the technical data Loki had provided and was busy working with Athena to estimate the dispersion pattern of the enemy shield would fire. To estimate the dispersion pattern the enemy would use to fire on the main fleet. Affirmative. Inform the rest of the fleet to make evasive actions as necessary. Georgius Averoff is to maintain heading and show these fools the error of their way. The Admiral glanced at the tactical display of the Georgius Averoff. Tens of meters of prow armor, of a dozen separate antimatter reactors dedicated entirely to the multiple shield emitters. It was a flying tank, and was befitting the proper battleship, meant to wade in and take a beating, and dish out better than it got. All fleets are to open fire on the behemoth. Tell the Shaldantas to stop dying like the cowards they are. They are to do everything in their power to break those damned humans. They still outnumber them, damn it all. The Grand Admiral was growing harried with all the sudden and brief searches of information. Something was clearly wrong. One moment he would be flagged by a dozen priority messages from his communications crew, and then those messages would vanish. His sensor operator couldn't answer why they could not confirm how far away the enemy's large central warship was, let alone where exactly the rest of the damn fleet was. And all of the while, the Counselor watched him with those dangerous, vicious eyes. Clearly, the Counselor was not much impressed with the Grand Admiral of the punitive fleet, and so he grew more nervous. Weapons range confirmed to main target, Grand Admiral. The census technician struggled to clear the interference that seemed to be actively battling him every step of the way. All ships, lock and fire! Fire! The Georgios Averoff plowed directly into the heart of the enemy's fire. The rest of the fleet, relying on Athena and the Admiral Staff's calculations and estimations, made minor course corrections to avoid the brunt of what the enemy fleet threw at them. Minutes passed as the main human fleet's formation swelled, then began to close in again. And then the Georgios Averoff was lit up like a small sun. Its shields flared constantly as all sorts of munitions struck harmlessly against its impossibly powerful shields, or were struck down by swaying arms of interceptor fire, loaded with tracer rounds, more for show to dishearten the enemy. More for show to dishearten the enemy further than for any practical targeting reasons. Nuclear warheads, kinetic penetrators, an array of energy weapons all failed to penetrate the battleship's shields and defenses, and it carried past the brunt of the enemy's fire with a pulse of light all of its own making. And another enemy warship detonated as it was struck by the battleship's main guns. Gathering party leader Fulian grasped the navigation struts of his family ship, glaring at the display screen that showed the gracefully turning enemy ships, a young race that had thundered out of the ether with insults and spite in the face of tradition and all that was right in accordance with the gods themselves. Those 5 enemy ships had turned through the ships. Those 5 enemy ships had turned. Those 5 enemy ships had turned through the ships of his cousins and had escaped unharmed. But not again. His clan was down to less than half of what had answered their leader's call. His sons and daughters, serving aboard the other ships of the Shaldantas tithe to the council's call to arms, had been lost so quickly. His people had never been built for war. They were tiny compared to other races of the Senate, and were little better than animals in the eyes of most of their betters, as was their place. But there was some hope amongst these people that if they acquitted themselves well in the war with the humans, they would rise in station. They were the first to officially answer the council's call, after all. His crew struggled to ready the weapons and grapples. They were scavenging race, and knew little of fighting with ships. They usually just swept through battlefields in the aftermath of the fighting, gathering salvage and supplies, not actually committing to the battle itself. One of his cousins brought his vessel ahead of Fulian's, shielding it with his own body as the human warship approached again. You could see the effects of those perfectly identical ships had on his cousin's vessel, and blossoms of heat tore along its patchwork hull of chunks of debris was a tore along and as blossoms of heat tore along its patchwork hull and chunks of debris was cast loose. But it worked. Just as his cousin's ship floundered and dropped away, its engines crippled from a blow that cut clear through its ship's prow and poorly reinforced interior, the lead enemy warship came into range. He issued no command. His family knew what they were about. The main guns caused the ship to shudder violently, metal screaming as it was twisted by the chatter of the cannons, throwing everything they had into the path of the lead enemy ship. And before they came abreast, electromagnetically charged grapples were launched, drawing massive cables with them into the void of space. They punched through the enemy's shields, weakened by the main guns of his cousin's vessels and his own, and dug deep into the armored hull. They were dug in and vacuum welded themselves into the metal of the human ship. The two vessels, passing in different directions, found themselves connected by those massive cables, the spools of which locked with the moment their grapples had found purchase. Bullion knew what would happen next. His family knew. They knew there was nothing to be done by... They knew there was nothing to be done but say their final prayers as those grapples were fired, knowing that their actions offered the rest of their people a chance for a better future, perhaps not as slaves, food, or entertainment for the council races. Captain Granger watched as the lead Shaldunter ship had broken apart. It had refused to break off, instead shielding the next ship in their formation with its own quickly shattered hull. The Valiant shields flared constantly as they impacted the lead ship's shots and debris field, and began to collapse as they met the second enemy vessel's fire. The rest of the first destroyer group held the same formation as during the first pass, and the Shaldunter fleet would be run between three columns of destroyers, and likely torn to shreds in the process. The fools refused to surrender, refused to abandon ship. It was a terrible impact. All hands brace. He was just beginning to turn to look at the sensor operator, who had detected what was about to happen seconds too late. The grapples launched by the ship... The grapples launched by the second Shaldunter punched through their weakened shields, dug into the hull of the Valiant, and the cables pulled tight. The Valiant was jerked off course too sharply for the inertial dampness to compensate. It spun hard to port as the second Shaldunter ship, to which they were connected, fired its engines at full power. The two vessels spun and broke apart, huge chunks of their hulls tore open to vent atmosphere and expose their crews to the vacuum of space. Not that any on either ship were alive to worry about it. End of chapter. That was quite a long one. Next one's also pretty long. Alright, I'm going to take a quick break and I'll be back in a couple minutes. I was threatened. I had to eat a sweetie. Otherwise, much more nastiness would happen. Okay, done chewing, so not chewing into the microphone. But I'm pretty sure my voice doesn't actually have another chapter that long in it. That's not great. We have been going for 2.5 hours, or 2 hours, 15 minutes. As you can hear, it's not quite 100%. My body is still all achy from falling down the stairs. Well, a couple stairs. Wasn't great. Wasn't life-threateningly high, but it was enough to hurt. Then tomorrow... Oh, excuse me. Fair enough. I can see how that would be very annoying. But to be fair, that is an entire sector of content on YouTube and on Twitch, chewing into microphones and eating. Not content that I particularly like, but it is a form of content. Ooh, excuse me. Meat bean sector, crunch, crunch, crunch. 5. Okie dokie, I think I'm actually going to call it a day. Voice is okay. Not happy, but okay. So, we did some nice work. We finished off series. I will be back tomorrow. Same time, same place. But, and yeah. Also very tired for some reason. I'm sure I slept okay, but I am struggling to concentrate. So yes, I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you for joining me. And this time in life, attention and time is at a premium. So I do very much appreciate you guys spending your time and attention with me. Have a great one. I hope you have a fantastic day, night, or whatever it may be. Sweet dreams, boring work, all that stuff. You know, all the good stuff I wish for you. I'll see you tomorrow. Charles.